The billionaire pretended to be unconscious to test his fiancée. But his maid exposed a terrible secret. Trust me, you won't forget this one. He was a billionaire who had everything money could buy, except one thing he could never be sure of. So one night, he closed his eyes and pretended the world had gone dark. What he heard in the silence that followed would break his heart in a way no business deal ever could. And the woman who exposed the truth wasn't the one wearing the ring. She was the one holding the water tray. Hey, welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today, and what country do you call home? I love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Today's story is one of those quiet, heavy ones, about love, trust, and the people we overlook until the moment they save us. It's emotional. It's got a twist you probably won't see coming. And by the end, I think it'll make you think differently about who really deserves your loyalty. Let's get into it. Ethan Cole had built an empire from nothing, and he could no longer remember what it felt like to trust someone completely. He was 34 years old, the founder of one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the East Coast, and by every outward measure, a man who had won at life. He owned a stone mansion outside Boston with ivy climbing the east wall, a garage of cars he rarely drove, and a fiancée named Vanessa Hart who looked, on paper and in photographs, like the perfect partner for a man like him. Vanessa was 33, elegant in the way old money is elegant, even though her own family had lost most of theirs years ago. She had met Ethan at a charity gala 2 years earlier, and from that night on, she had been at his side, smiling for cameras, hosting his dinners, wearing his ring. Ethan loved her. Or he had, once, in the simple, uncomplicated way people love someone before doubt creeps in. Lately, though, something had shifted. Small things. The way Vanessa's phone would buzz late at night and she'd step out of the room to answer it. The way she'd grown distant during business trips, distracted during dinners, present in body but somewhere else entirely in mind. Ethan wasn't a man who ignored patterns. Patterns were how he'd built his fortune, and the pattern forming around Vanessa unsettled him more than any failed investment ever had. He hadn't told anyone about his suspicions. Not his lawyer, not his business partner, not even his own mother, who adored Vanessa and had already picked out a hat for the wedding. But that Thursday evening, sitting across from Vanessa at the long dining table, watching her check her phone under the table for the third time in 10 minutes, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He decided he needed to know the truth. Not the version Vanessa performed for him, but the real one, the one she'd only reveal if she believed no one who mattered was listening. So he came up with a plan. A reckless one, maybe. But he was tired of guessing. That night, after dinner, Ethan complained of a sudden headache. He rubbed his temple, blinked slowly, and told Vanessa the room felt like it was tilting. Then, with practiced ease that surprised even him, he let his knees buckle and lowered himself onto the living room couch, eyes fluttering shut. Ethan. Vanessa's voice, sharp with alarm, cut through the room. Ethan, can you hear me? He didn't answer. He controlled his breathing, slow and even, and let his body go still. Behind his closed eyes, his heart was pounding harder than it ever had in any boardroom. Because now, there was no turning back. He was about to find out exactly who Vanessa Hart really was, and some part of him was terrified of the answer. The house went quiet in the way houses do right before chaos breaks loose. Vanessa knelt beside him, her red dress pooling against the hardwood floor, calling his name twice more. When he still didn't respond, she called out toward the hallway, "Maria! Maria, get water, hurry!" Maria Alvarez, the house's live-in maid for the past 6 years, appeared at the doorway within seconds, a tray with a pitcher and 2 glasses already in her hands, as if some instinct had told her something was wrong before she was even called. She was 32, quiet, careful, the kind of person whose competence made her almost invisible in a house like this, noticed only when something went wrong. She froze in the doorway for half a second, taking in the scene, Ethan lying motionless across the tufted leather headboard bed where Vanessa had half-dragged him, his pajama shirt open at the collar, his face pale under the chandelier light. Vanessa leaning over him, her hand cupped near his ear. Maria's first instinct was pure worry. She hurried forward with the tray. "Should I call an ambulance, Ms. Hart? Should I?" "No," Vanessa said quickly, almost too quickly, holding up a hand without turning around. "No, no ambulance. He gets these spells sometimes. Low blood pressure. He just needs to rest." Maria hesitated at the door, tray still in her hands, something about Vanessa's tone snagging at her attention. She had worked in this house long enough to know Ethan Cole did not get spells. The man ran 6 miles every morning before sunrise and hadn't taken a sick day in the 2 years Maria had known him. But it wasn't her place to argue. She set the tray on the nightstand, poured a glass of water, and stood back, unsure whether to leave. That was when she heard it. Vanessa, believing Ethan was unconscious and believing Maria was too far away or too unimportant to matter, leaned close to his ear and whispered, soft, urgent, meant for no one but him. "Just hold on a little longer, okay? A few more weeks. Once the papers go through, none of this will matter anymore. I promise." Maria went still by the nightstand, water glass forgotten in her hand. It was such a small sentence. 6 seconds, maybe 7. But something about the way Vanessa said it, the relief underneath it, the certainty, made the back of Maria's neck go cold. She told herself she'd misheard. She told herself it was nothing, some private joke between 2 people who loved each other, none of her business regardless. She set the glass down quietly, murmured that she'd be in the kitchen if needed, and stepped out of the room. But her hands were shaking as she walked down the hallway. And on the bed behind her, Ethan Cole, very much conscious, every word landing on him like a slow, spreading bruise, kept his eyes closed and his breath even, and wondered what exactly his fiancée had just promised somebody who wasn't him. Maria didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small room above the garage, staring at the ceiling, replaying the whisper over and over. A few more weeks. Once the papers go through, none of this will matter anymore. Papers? What papers? She told herself it was none of her business 6 different times before finally admitting to herself that she didn't believe that anymore. Not after what happened the next morning. Ethan had recovered from his spell by breakfast, insisting he felt fine, waving off Vanessa's suggestion to see a doctor. He caught Maria's eye once across the kitchen, just once, and something in his gaze made her stomach tighten, though she couldn't have said why. Around 10 that morning, while Ethan was in his home office on a call, Maria was dusting the study down the hall when she saw Vanessa slip inside the office's adjoining sitting room with her phone pressed to her ear, the door not quite closed behind her. Maria knew she shouldn't have listened. She told herself that too, even as she stood frozen with a feather duster in her hand, unable to move. "No, he still doesn't suspect anything," Vanessa was saying, low and fast. "The doctor's report is ready. Once I get power of attorney signed, we file the guardianship petition within the month. Richard already has the judge lined up. I know it feels wrong, but Ethan doesn't need to run the company anymore, not with what's coming. This is for the best. For all of us." Maria's blood went cold. Guardianship. Power of attorney. Doctor's report. It clicked into place with sickening clarity. Vanessa wasn't planning a wedding. She was planning to have Ethan declared incompetent, to use some fabricated medical diagnosis, maybe even last night's staged collapse, as evidence that he could no longer manage his own affairs. And Richard, Ethan's business partner and oldest friend, was somehow in on it, arranging a judge, arranging papers, arranging to hand Ethan's entire company and fortune over to the 2 of them. The maid understood something in that instant that made her hands tremble. Whatever Vanessa believed about last night's collapse, whether she thought it was real or was simply using it, she was building a case against a man who trusted her completely. A man who, as far as Maria knew, still believed he was engaged to someone who loved him. Maria backed away from the door as quietly as she could, heart hammering, the duster nearly slipping from her fingers. She had a choice to make now, and she knew it. She could stay silent, keep her job, keep her head down the way she always had. Or she could risk everything she had built in this house, her position, her reputation, maybe even her safety, to tell a man the truth about the woman he was about to marry. She thought of her own mother, back home, who had raised her to believe that silence in the face of wrong was its own kind of lie. Maria made her decision before she even reached the kitchen. She didn't go to Ethan right away. She was too afraid, not of him, but of being wrong, of destroying something based on a fragment of an overheard call. So instead, Maria did something that surprised even her. She started paying attention. Over the following days, she noticed things she'd been trained, in 6 years of quiet service, not to notice. The courier who arrived twice that week with envelopes marked confidential, addressed not to Ethan but to Vanessa directly. The name Dr. Alan Whitfield scrawled on a notepad by the phone in the sitting room, a name Maria had never heard associated with Ethan's actual physician. A folder, glimpsed for only a second on the desk before Vanessa swept it into a drawer, with a tab that read Cole, Competency Evil. Each piece was small. Together, they formed something Maria could no longer pretend not to see. Meanwhile, Ethan was living his own quiet nightmare. Since the night of the whisper, he had said nothing to Vanessa about what he'd heard, playing the recovering, slightly embarrassed fiancée who'd had one bad spell and wanted to move past it. But inside, he was unraveling. He'd hired no investigator, told no one, because some stubborn, wounded part of him kept hoping there was an explanation that didn't make Vanessa a stranger wearing a familiar face. He noticed Maria differently that week, too. Noticed the way she'd glance at him and then quickly look away, like someone carrying a weight she didn't know how to put down. He'd known Maria for 6 years. She had never once looked at him with fear before. On Friday evening, he found her alone in the laundry room, folding towels with hands that weren't quite steady. "Maria," he said gently, closing the door halfway behind him. "Is something wrong?" She froze, towel still in her hands, and for a long moment said nothing. Ethan waited. He had learned, in business, that silence often did more work than questions. Finally, Maria set the towel down. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe I would never say it if I wasn't sure." Ethan felt something drop in his chest, cold and heavy. "Okay," he said quietly. "Tell me." And so Maria did. She told him about the whisper the night of his collapse, every word of it, because she had turned it over in her mind so many times she could recite it exactly. She told him about the phone call outside his office. About Richard. About the judge. About the folder with his name on it and the words competency evil beneath it. Ethan sat down slowly on an overturned laundry basket, his legs no longer entirely willing to hold him, and for once, it wasn't an act. "Say that again," he said hoarsely. "The part about Richard." Maria repeated it. Watched the color drain from his face. His oldest friend. His fiancée. A judge. A fabricated diagnosis. It had all been happening quietly around him for who knew how long, in a house he owned, under a roof he'd built to keep the people he loved safe. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked, his voice raw. "You could lose everything. Your job. If Vanessa finds out." "I know," Maria said simply. "But you were kind to me when nobody else in this house even remembered my name. I couldn't watch this happen to you and say nothing. That's not who I am." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. The days that followed felt like walking through a house he no longer recognized. Ethan didn't confront Vanessa. Not yet. He needed proof, real proof, not just an overheard whisper and a name on a notepad, because he knew Vanessa well enough to know she'd have an explanation ready for anything less. And he needed to understand exactly how deep the betrayal ran before he decided what to do about it. He called his lawyer, a woman named Patricia Nguyen who had handled his affairs for a decade and whom he trusted the way he trusted almost no one else. He didn't tell her everything over the phone. He asked her to come to the house quietly, off the books, no calendar entry, no assistant looped in. When Patricia arrived 2 days later, disguised in the household schedule as a wine consultant, Ethan laid it all out: Maria's account, the folder, the doctor's name. Patricia's expression hardened with every sentence. "If this is real," she said, "what you're describing is fraud. Possibly conspiracy. If Richard is involved, we're talking about a coordinated effort to seize control of your company using a falsified medical record. This isn't a bad breakup, Ethan. This is a crime." "I need proof," Ethan said. "Something real. Something a judge would actually look at." Patricia nodded slowly. "Then we need your maid's help. Discreetly. And carefully. Because if Vanessa realizes she's been found out before we have what we need, she'll destroy the paper trail and disappear with whatever she's already gathered." That evening, Ethan asked Maria to sit with him in his office. Door locked, blinds drawn. He explained what Patricia had said. He asked, gently, apologetically, whether she'd be willing to help gather what they needed. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would put her at risk, just her eyes and ears in a house where she already moved unnoticed. Maria didn't hesitate as long as he expected her to. "I've been afraid in this house for a week," she said quietly. "Afraid of what I knew and couldn't say. I'd rather be afraid doing something about it." Over the next several days, a strange, careful partnership formed inside the walls of the Cole mansion. Maria kept careful note of the documents that passed through the sitting room, the names on envelopes, the days Richard visited without warning. Ethan, still playing the unsuspecting fiancée at dinner each night, watched Vanessa across the table and felt something in himself grow quietly, permanently colder, not toward Maria, but toward the woman he had once planned to spend his life with. Vanessa noticed none of it. She still touched his arm at breakfast. Still called him honey in front of guests. Still wore his ring like a woman genuinely counting down to a wedding day. Ethan began to understand, with a kind of grief he hadn't expected, that the woman he loved might never have existed at all, that he had spent 2 years falling for a performance staged by someone entirely different underneath it. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday, 9 days after the fake collapse. Maria was dusting the study bookshelves, genuinely dusting, this time, not lingering, when she noticed the sitting room door slightly ajar and Vanessa's voice, tight with irritation, drifting through it. "Richard, the judge needs the evaluation finalized by Friday or the whole timeline slips. I can't keep stalling Ethan with excuses." "No, I haven't told him anything. Why would I? He still thinks we're getting married in June." Maria's hands stilled on the shelf. She glanced toward the small drawer beneath the side table in the study, the one she'd seen Vanessa slide the folder into weeks before. She knew it was reckless. She knew that if she was caught, there would be no explaining it away. But she also knew Ethan needed something more than a memory of an overheard sentence. He needed paper, dates, signatures. She waited until Vanessa's call ended and she'd stepped out toward the kitchen, then moved quickly to the drawer. Her fingers found the folder, Cole, Competency Evil, and inside, exactly what she feared, a psychiatric evaluation form, mostly filled out, dated the night of Ethan's collapse, signed by a Dr. Alan Whitfield who, according to the letterhead, worked at a private clinic 2 towns over. Beneath it, a partially completed guardianship petition naming Vanessa Hart as proposed conservator of Ethan Cole's person and estate. And beneath that, a handwritten note in Richard's familiar block lettering. Judge Halloway confirmed for the 14th. Keep him calm until then. Maria's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone twice trying to photograph each page. She heard footsteps in the hallway and shoved the folder back into the drawer half a second before Vanessa reappeared, phone still in hand, barely glancing at her. "Something wrong, Maria?" Vanessa asked, distracted. "Just finishing up in here, Ms. Hart," Maria said, and was startled by how steady her own voice sounded. That night, she handed her phone to Ethan in the locked office, and he scrolled through the photographs in silence. The fabricated diagnosis, the guardianship petition, Richard's note about keeping him calm until the 14th. 4 days away. Ethan set the phone down on his desk and pressed both hands over his face for a long moment. 2 years, he said finally, voice muffled. 2 years, And I never once suspected the two people I trusted most were planning to have me declared unfit and take my entire life away from me on a fake doctor's signature. You suspected enough to test her, Maria said softly. That counts for something. Ethan looked up at her, eyes red-rimmed but sharp again, the businessman returning to his face. It counts for everything now, he said. Because now I know exactly what to do. Patricia moved fast once she had the photographs. Within 2 days, she'd confirmed that Dr. Alan Whitfield had no record of ever examining Ethan Cole, that Judge Holloway's clerk had no scheduled competency hearing under that name at all, meaning the judge lined up was either a bribe in progress or an outright lie. Richard had told Vanessa to keep her committed to the plan. Patricia quietly alerted a contact in the state attorney's office, laying groundwork for fraud charges without tipping off Vanessa or Richard that anyone was watching. Ethan, for his part, kept playing his role at the dinner table, and it was the hardest performance of his life. He complimented Vanessa's wedding planning. He let Richard clap him on the back at the office and call him buddy in front of the whole floor. Every smile cost him something. The plan Patricia devised was simple in shape, if not in execution. Force the guardianship scheme into the open before it could quietly disappear. On the morning of the 14th, the date Richard's note had named, Ethan would announce, unprompted, that he'd been feeling off again, dizzy, forgetful, the way Vanessa had described his supposed spells. He'd let Vanessa believe her fabricated diagnosis was finally about to be useful. And when she reached for the paperwork to help him, Patricia and a state investigator, already positioned nearby, would be there to see exactly what she produced. Maria was terrified for him. What if something goes wrong? She asked, the night before, finding him still awake in the study. Then at least it'll go wrong with the truth in the room, Ethan said. I'd rather that than another year of not knowing who I'm sleeping next to. He paused, looking at her properly then, at the woman who'd risked her job and her safety in a house that had never once, in 6 years, treated her like she mattered enough to notice. Maria, he said quietly, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I see you. I don't think I really did, before. Not the way I should have. Maria didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and simply nodded, her throat tight. Neither of them slept much that night. Down the hall, Vanessa slept soundly, already dreaming, perhaps, of a signature and a judge and a life reshaped entirely in her favor. The morning of the 14th arrived grey and still, the kind of quiet that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. Ethan came down to breakfast rubbing his temple, telling Vanessa the dizziness was back, that his hands felt strange, that he'd woken up unsure for a moment where he even was. He watched something flicker behind her eyes, not concern. He realized now that he knew what to look for, but calculation. You should rest today, Vanessa said gently, guiding him toward the study sofa. I'll have some paperwork brought over, just some things for the house, in case you need me to handle more while you recover. Nothing important. Of course, Ethan said, letting his voice go soft and distant. Whatever you think is best, Vanessa. I trust you. The words nearly broke his own heart to say. 20 minutes later, Richard arrived, carrying a leather folder Ethan recognized instantly from Maria's photographs. Patricia and a state investigator named Detective Ruiz were already seated, unseen, in the adjoining sunroom, having arrived under the guise of insurance appraisers looking at the property, a cover story Ethan had arranged the day before. Vanessa spread the guardianship papers across the coffee table in front of Ethan, her voice warm and practiced. This is just precautionary, honey. Just in case these spells keep happening, so I can help manage things for you. You don't even have to read it carefully, I've already gone over everything. Of course, Ethan said again. He picked up the pen she handed him, and then set it down. Actually, he said, his voice suddenly clear, steady, entirely his own, I think I will read it carefully. Especially the part where Dr. Alan Whitfield examined me for a condition I've never had, on a night when I was faking a collapse to see exactly what you'd do with it. The color drained from Vanessa's face so fast it was almost violent to watch. Ethan, I don't know what you're Judge Holloway has no competency hearing scheduled, Ethan continued, standing now. I checked. There is no judge, Vanessa. Just Richard's word, and your signature, and a fake diagnosis you were planning to use to take my company and my life away from me. Richard, by the doorway, went pale and silent, his mouth opening and closing without sound. That was when Patricia and Detective Ruiz stepped in from the sunroom, and the room that had held so much quiet performance for 2 years finally, completely, fell apart. Vanessa's composure shattered in stages, first disbelief, then fury, then, as Detective Ruiz laid out exactly what evidence had already been gathered, something that looked almost like relief, the exhausted collapse of someone who had been carrying a lie so long it had become heavier than any truth. You don't understand what it's like, she said, voice cracking, not quite looking at Ethan anymore. Richard came to me 18 months ago. Said the company was in trouble, said you were making reckless decisions, said this was the only way to protect it, protect all of us. I told myself it was for your own good. I told myself that so many times I almost believed it. Ethan felt no satisfaction watching her unravel. Only a tired kind of sadness for the 2 years he'd spent building a future with someone who had, apparently, been planning to erase his future entirely. Richard didn't even try to explain himself. He asked, quietly, for a lawyer, and said nothing further. The following weeks moved with the strange, clinical speed of legal machinery. Charges were filed: fraud, conspiracy, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable person, though Ethan's own testimony made clear he had never actually been vulnerable at all, only pretending to be, which complicated things in ways the attorneys would spend months untangling. Richard was removed from the company's board within days. Vanessa's engagement ring went back into its original box, and she left the mansion the same week, her belongings packed by movers Ethan never once saw arrive. The house felt different afterward, quieter, but a different kind of quiet than before. Not tense. Not watchful. Just still. Ethan found himself, more than once in those weeks, standing in doorways looking for Maria before he even realized he was doing it. Not because he needed anything. Just because her presence had become, somewhere in the middle of the worst month of his life, the only thing in the house that had ever felt honest. You didn't have to do any of it, he told her one evening. The two of them sharing coffee at the kitchen island instead of him being served at the dining table the way the house had always operated before. You could have stayed quiet and kept your job and none of this would have touched you. I know, Maria said simply. But some things matter more than staying safe. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You're the only person in this house who's ever told me the truth without being asked twice, he said. I don't know how I'm supposed to just go back to treating you like staff after that. Maria smiled, small and a little shy. Maybe you don't have to figure that out today. A year later, the mansion outside Boston looked much the same from the outside. Same ivy on the east wall, same long gravel drive. But inside, it had become an entirely different kind of home. Ethan's company had recovered fully, stronger for the scrutiny it had survived. Richard was gone, facing his own long legal reckoning. Vanessa had accepted a plea deal and disappeared from Ethan's life as completely as she once tried to disappear his own name from the ownership of everything he'd built. And Maria was no longer the quiet, unnoticed woman who moved through the house with a tray in her hands and her name half forgotten by everyone but her employer. She still lived there, still knew every creak in the floorboards, but the space between her and Ethan had changed into something neither of them had expected and both of them, quietly, had come to treasure. They took things slow, without cameras or headlines or performance. Just two people who had learned, the hard way, what honesty actually looked like when it mattered. Ethan liked to say, when people asked how he'd ended up here, that the most important lesson his fortune ever taught him had nothing to do with money at all. It was this: that the people who love you truthfully are rarely the ones performing the loudest displays of devotion. Sometimes they're the ones standing quietly in the doorway, tray in hand, brave enough to tell you something you don't want to hear, simply because it's true. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's that real loyalty rarely announces itself. It shows up in small, unglamorous moments, a whispered warning, an uncomfortable truth, someone choosing honesty over their own safety. Don't overlook the quiet people in your life. Sometimes they're the ones who'd actually walk through fire for you. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that good, honest people are still out there. I'll see you in the next story. Take care of each other.